Hey guys, it's Joshua Klein here, your host of the Draft Beard podcast. Tonight, we're going to do another recap of an NFL division, and that is going to be the NFC South. So we're going to take a look at the NFC South teams tonight, going from the least favorite to my most favorite drafts among the NFC South division teams. I have the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, and my favorite draft of the NFC South was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we're going to get started tonight with the Atlanta Falcons. If you watched anything about the NFL draft or know anything or read anything about the NFL draft, then you already know that the Atlanta Falcons made one of the most puzzling and perplexing picks that I've ever seen in day one of the NFL draft. And that is taking quarterback Michael Penix out of the University of Washington. Now, why is this pick so puzzling? Well, because they just signed a quarterback to a massive 4-year, $180 million deal in Kirk Cousins. He was a little older, probably near the end of his time playing in the NFL in a couple years. But then you take Michael Penix at number 8 overall. I just don't understand at all what the Atlanta Falcons were doing. I mean, I get it when Terry Fontenot says afterwards that there's nothing worse than being in quarterback purgatory, which I understand completely. That is a 100% true statement. But when you use the 8th overall pick after you sign a quarterback to this massive deal as a signal that you have a team that you think you're just a quarterback away, well, then you draft Michael Penix, who's going to sit for a few years. Now, if Kirk Cousins gets hurt and Michael Penix comes in and plays, that's fantastic. But using the 8th overall pick on a player that I had a first/second round grade on, I understand the NFL is much higher on Michael Penix than I was. But using the 8th overall pick on a player when you needed to bolster some other areas of your team, or even trading down a little bit in the draft, maybe accumulate some picks, just don't understand it. This is one that's either going to work out in Fontenot, the general manager of Atlanta, is going to look like a genius, or he's going to be fired and fired quickly. So not to say that Michael Penix isn't a bad quarterback. I also feel bad for him. He's not going to a situation where he can play. He is one of the quarterbacks in this draft class. He was ready to play right now. He could come in and try to be a starter for an NFL team and said he's going to sit on the bench. If you were going to go and draft a quarterback, maybe go with J.J. McCarthy, someone who could learn from Kirk Cousins, sit for a couple years, and be the next Aaron Rodgers / Jordan Love and come out in a couple years with that seasoning and development. But they went with Michael Penix. I hope it works out for him, but it is very puzzling. And then you get into the second round, and they did pretty much the same thing, puzzling and perplexing, and just don't understand what they were thinking in making this pick. They drafted Rook Ororo, the defensive tackle out of Clemson. Nice player. I had him in my top 10 defensive tackles. He is a guy who he has a high ceiling. He could develop into a really good player. But at the same time, you're sitting there and you pick him, and then very next pick is Jerzon Newton, who I had number 7 on my board. A lot of people had him, maybe the top 15 players in this draft. I was extremely high on him. I was extremely high on him last year. I wish he would have came out last year. He didn't. Nothing changed my mind and my opinion on Jerzon Newton. But you take a guy who I had way farther down the draft board, more in the 50s and 60s. I think I'd have to go back and look at my board. But over a guy who is arguably a top 10 talent in this draft, Pro Bowl potential, and just one pick later, the Commanders pick him. But we'll get into the Commanders draft a little later. But man, I just don't understand that. It's 2 very puzzling picks back to back in the first and second round. And then they come in the third round, they draft an edge rusher. Listen, they needed an edge rusher. I like Braylon Trice as a player for what he is. He's a workhorse. He's not super athletic. Picking him in the third round is a great spot. Maybe his positional value could be a little bit higher. You know, I kind of saw him as an early third round player. Not a bad pick at all. He's not going to be an exceptional wow you pass rusher, but he's going to get the job done. He just kind of knows what to do. He has a lot of good pass rush moves. It kind of reminds me a little of Laiatu Latu without the athletic ability or the finishing ability. So that's a good player there. I think you can start. I like Brandon Dorless. It wasn't a bad pick either, depending on where you're going to play him. I think he has the potential if you can move him inside. They did, I believe, announce him as a defensive tackle. I think that's his better position, but he can play all on the defensive line. Look, they knew they needed help on the defensive line. They did get some, but they could have had one of the absolute best pass rushers in this class in the first round with either Laiatu or Turner or Jared Verse. Any one of those three would have been home run picks for the Falcons. But again, we all know what they did. We've recapped that enough. I like J.G. Bertrand. He's a good special teams linebacker. He was a captain at the University of Notre Dame, special team or a backup linebacker in the NFL in round 5. That's kind of where you pick those players. And then getting Jason McClellan, he can be a depth running back for you. And Casey Washington, the wide receiver out of Illinois. I actually would have rather seen, if we're going to draft wide receiver at Illinois, Isaiah Williams. He actually ended up going undrafted. But overall, the Atlanta Falcons with a draft class that I shall say it leaves a lot to be desired. And it's just a shame because the Atlanta Falcons fans out there thinking that they can make a run here, win the division, maybe make the playoffs. They didn't really fill the needs that they really had with premium players that they could have had in this draft. And if you come away with Michael Penix and followed up with Jerzon Newton, and I'm like, oh, okay, look, that may not be in the order I would have drafted him, but you could have came away with Jerzon Newton, an impact defensive pass rusher in the second round. So I actually kind of more nitpick the Falcons draft over that one. I can understand the rationale of Michael Penix, though I think it's terrible execution. But that is the Atlanta Falcons draft, the absolute worst draft in the draft this year. And I don't usually say those kind of things strongly because this is an instant reaction. We will know down the road what these players actually develop into. And the next one is the Carolina Panthers, another draft class that is I do like their first round pick. I was a big Xavier Legette fan. They traded up one pick going from the second round to the first round to pick Xavier Legette in day one, gets the extra year of the 5th-year option. I really like him a lot. I think he can develop into a really good NFL receiver. If you use him according to his skill set. It's like an A.J. Brown light. One of my pound the table guys on the wide receiver position in this year's draft. It's going to help Bryce Young a lot. Great pickup. I wish they would have doubled down on wide receiver, but they didn't to give Bryce Young more help. You get Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas. Listen, they need a running back. He is coming off the ACL injury. I'm not sure how much help he's going to be this year for the Carolina Panthers. Trevin Wallace, decent player. I think he might be able to develop into a starting linebacker. Again, the linebacking class was kind of weak this year, so probably slightly overdrafted. Jatavion Sanders, the tight end out of Texas. Good value in the 4th round. I know a lot of people are high on him. I had him as my 3rd or 4th rated tight end in this class. He's really a wide receiver in a tight end's body. He's not really going to be an inline tight end. But the Carolina Panthers need some help for some weapons for Bryce Young. I would rather see a little bit better of a player there, maybe in the 2nd round instead of Jonathan Brooks. Then you get into the 5th round, Charles Smith-Wade, decent cornerback out of Washington State. I think he can fill in as nickel and dime coverages for you. Don't necessarily see him as a long-term outside corner starter for you. And then you rounded out the draft with Jaden Crumdy out of Mississippi State and Michael Barrett out of Michigan. Michael Barrett, he's going to be kind of a special teams kind of guy for you at linebacker from the University of Michigan. So not as much to say about the Carolina Panthers draft class as obviously I did with the Atlanta Falcons, but it's an okay draft class. They think they fell just a little bit short of really doing the damage that they could have done and working the draft board a little bit better and helping out Bryce Young. Then we get into the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints absolutely desperately needed a tackle. I loved Halisi Fuaga, who could plug in at right tackle. He is just a mean guy. He is a true football player. One of my favorite players in this class, and they get him in round 1. That's a great pick by the New Orleans Saints when you kind of knew you were kind of handcuffed, I should say, and pigeonholed into the type of position that you were going to need in the first round. Luckily for the New Orleans Saints, the offensive tackle class this year was absolutely loaded in the first round. They ended up getting one of my favorites in the draft. Then they pick up Kool-Aid McKinstry in the second round. Again, really good corner. I had him as a borderline first round, second round grade, more of a second round graded player. I really like Kool-Aid McKinstry. It's definitely in the second tier of my corners in this draft. Think he can be a quality number 1 cornerback for you, maybe number CB2, but he's going to be a starter in the NFL. I really like that pick. And then after that, this is where the Saints their draft kind of is leaving a little bit to be desired here. They did pick up Spencer Rattler. You need a quarterback. Not a bad pick. But then Bub Means, he's a 6'1" slot receiver, high IQ, decent, okay player. Jalen Ford out of Texas, the linebacker. And then I did like Christian Boyd. He's one of my favorite players in this draft, defensive tackle position. He didn't get invited to the combine. I think he can be really good, a run stuffing defensive tackle in the NFL. He's going to take some time to develop. I actually had a 3rd round grade on him. It was really high on him. So that's a really good pickup there in round 6 for the Saints. But they didn't have anything really between picks 41 and 150 that kind of leaves them a little bit with some more impact they could have used and some cheaper players. You know, the Saints, they mess around with that salary cap, something crazy. I don't know how they do it every year. They'd really need an infusion of some younger players that they can get on the cheap, not having a 3rd round pick, not having a 4th round pick, and a cost them there. They need a quarterback. After Derek Carr has not been really what a lot of Saints fans hoped he would be coming over from the Las Vegas Raiders. So getting Spencer Rattler in there, that he can kind of maybe sit for a few years. He has some potential. I do like him. I do like his potential. He has a really good arm. That's a pretty good pick in the 5th round. But outside of filling that tackle spot and getting that CB2, the draft class was kind of left a little bit to be desired. After that, I don't see a lot of players who are going to make an immediate impact, or they're going to need some development to make some impact down the road. Next up, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 1st round kind of lucked into having Graham Barton fall to them. He is one of my favorite players in this class in the offensive line. I know I say that a lot, but I had a lot of players on the offensive line that I really, really liked. He is so versatile. He is an all-pro interior offensive lineman in the making. And to get him at pick 26 is phenomenal value. Great job by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Definitely fills a need there. Chris Braswell in the 2nd round. Wasn't as high on him. Had more of a 3rd round grade on him. But he kind of fills an edge need that they have there. Tyke Smith, really good run defender. He can play really between nickel and safety, but he's a very smart football player. He's really going to help their run game. They get Jalen McMillan, who can be a slot wide receiver for them. I think they get 4 impact. Well, I would say impact, but they get 4 players who could be starters. And that's what you're looking for. Get starters. Ultimately, you want all pros, right? That's really what you want. But this draft is about finding starters, whether it's, your offensive line, defensive line, special teams, find a starter. I think they've done that pretty well here with their first 3 picks. It picks 26, 57, 89, and 92. And then Bucky Irving, listen, he is what he is. I'm not a big fan of Bucky Irving. I know that if you watch the NFL Stock Exchange and Trevor Sikkema being a Bucs fan, I think that's absolutely hilarious that guy ended up going there. Touche, my friend, touche. But not the biggest Bucky Irving fan, but he goes in round 4. And then Elijah Klein and David Culp, hey, maybe they work out. I don't really see much from either one of those players. They're players that'll fight to make roster spots in rounds 6 and 7. So overall, the Buccaneers had a pretty decent draft. They really scored a home run at the top of the draft. I think 2 teams really just didn't fare well in the draft this year with the Panthers and the Falcons. The Saints kind of had the mid-level draft. They hit a home run really with their tackle pick there. So that's kind of the overview of the NFC South. The team that I think did the best is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They definitely a much better draft than their other 3. Overall, the NFC South, they're all 4 of the teams in this are probably in the bottom half of the top 32 in my overall rankings for the 1 through 32 for the NFL draft, or rankings for all the teams. Oh my gosh, I almost knocked over my microphone there. But with that, that is my review of the NFC South, and I hope to see you guys on the next podcast as we review another division in the NFL, go over all those teams and what their draft entailed.
The Draft Beard Podcast.